Right now, as you're listening to this, there is this massive, highly complex, totally invisible economy operating just right beneath our feet.
Yeah, it really is completely invisible to the mainstream.
Exactly. And just in the UK alone, it is valued at a staggering £184.3 billion every single year.
I mean, you say that number out loud and it almost doesn't sound real.
It doesn't, and it has no CEOs. It pays out zero dividends. It doesn't get glossy write-ups in the Financial Times. And it is almost entirely run by totally exhausted women, typically right between the ages of 45 and 57.
The exact demographic the corporate world likes to pretend just sort of lost their ambition.
Right, yeah. So welcome to this deep dive. Today we are talking about that invisible infrastructure that literally holds the world up. And more importantly, how the people running it can finally stop working for free.
That is a whole mission today.
It is. Now, I need to be incredibly clear up front about the parameters of what we're doing here today, because this isn't a standard conversation. If you're listening to this, you are almost certainly sitting right now with a very specific document open in front of you.
Yeah, you probably have it printed out on your desk. Maybe you've got a pen in your hand.
Exactly. This is the audio companion to the third and final section of the Matriarchs Field Manual, and obviously its companion workbook, written by Verity Johnston of Matriarchs and the Machine.
And we are focusing entirely, exclusively on the section titled Rain, which of course follows the foundational work you've already done in those first two sections, Recover and Rise.
Right. And because you already have the manual right there, maybe with notes scribbled in the margins, we are not going to insult your intelligence by sitting here and summarizing the basic exercises.
No, absolutely not. We aren't going to walk you through a table of contents or read the action steps aloud. I mean, you can read.
Right. The role of this audio is entirely different. Our job today is to deepen your understanding of the mechanics underneath those exercises. We need to explore the structural physics of why this section exists, what it is actually demanding of you right now, and what the world looks like when you do this work.
Because Rain isn't asking you to, close your eyes and dream bigger. It's asking you to build what is actually tangibly there.
Yes, and before we get into the architecture of Rain, let's just ground ourselves in the tone. Because if you came here looking for, motivational self-help.
Oh, this is definitely not that.
No. If you want someone to tell you to just manifest your dreams or lean in a little harder, you are just in the wrong place entirely.
Yeah, this is a structural, unflinching audit. The tone of Rain is direct. It is warm, sure, but it is highly serious.
Very serious.
And I want to speak directly to the midlife woman listening to this right now, looking at her workbook. You need to understand a foundational truth before you write down another word. You are someone who has been failed by broken systems.
Say that again, because I think people skip over that.
You have been failed by broken systems.
Yeah.
You have not failed because of some lack of resilience. You haven't failed because your capability just suddenly evaporated overnight.
Right.
The traditional corporate and economic systems simply do not have an architecture designed to hold a woman at your stage of life.
Which is exactly why Rain isn't asking you to dream. It's asking you to look at the rubble of what that broken system left behind and grab those exact bricks to build your own infrastructure.
Yes. But to understand how to build that new architecture, we really have to look at the architect herself. Verity Johnston is not your typical career coach giving, theoretical advice from the sidelines.
No, her background is totally wild, and it's the specific lens through which this entire manual has to be read. She brings what she calls an integrated vantage point.
Which is so rare. I mean, for 3 decades, she was sitting at the board tables of global creative agencies. She was in the rooms where capital is allocated, where institutional strategy is formed.
Where the power dynamics of modern corporations are actually designed, basically.
Exactly. But at the exact same time, and this is the part that makes her perspective so incredibly potent, she was operating as a USDA shop steward and a health and safety representative.
Right, and for our listeners outside the UK, USDAW is the Union of Shop, Distributive, and Allied Workers. It's this massive trade union.
So while she was navigating these, high-end agency boardrooms, she was also literally standing on picket lines. She was in these grueling adversarial spaces of disciplinary hearings.
Representing frontline workers who were up against corporate machinery that was explicitly designed to exhaust them into compliance.
And when you hold those two realities in your head simultaneously, you produce a quality of analysis that a traditional executive simply cannot generate.
Because they only see half the board.
Right. She knows how the machine is programmed from the control room, but she also knows exactly how its gears grind the people down at the bottom. She understands exhaustion by design.
I get that, and the dual perspective is incredibly powerful. But let's look at the reality of the listener. Lots of people have complex resumes. What makes Johnston's framework so specific to the midlife woman?
Well, because she's writing from a very particular personal context, right? Getting a late-in-life ADHD diagnosis in her 50s, navigating the physical reality of perimenopause.
Suddenly becoming an empty nester.
Exactly. And how does that lived experience fundamentally alter the standard climb-the-ladder career advice we've been fed for 40 years? It shatters it because it introduces the core concept of the convergence window.
The convergence window. If you understand nothing else about the structural forces acting on you right now, you have to understand this.
Yeah, the convergence window typically hits between the ages of 45 and 57. It is the exact crushing moment when multiple massive life pressures collide simultaneously.
Right, it's not just one thing going wrong. It's a systemic pileup.
Mm.
Talk about the biological side first.
So you have perimenopause fundamentally altering your neurological and metabolic reality. We're talking brain fog, severe exhaustion, physical volatility.
And at the exact same time, you hit peak caregiving. You are the classic sandwich generation.
Right. So you might be managing the intense emotional and financial demands of teenagers while simultaneously navigating the absolute labyrinth of elder care for aging parents.
Which is a full-time job on its own, and then you add the psychological reckoning.
Precisely. This is the exact window when we see a massive spike in late neurodivergent diagnoses for women.
Yes, the ADHD and autism diagnoses that get missed in childhood.
Exactly. The coping mechanisms that a woman used to mask her ADHD in her 20s and 30s, they finally just snap under the sheer weight of the convergence window.
And right when she's carrying this impossible, totally invisible load, the professional world decides she is obsolete.
She hits a brick wall of ageist hiring practices.
So society looks at this woman, who is essentially operating as a high-level logistics coordinator, nurse, and crisis manager while dealing with massive neurological shifts. And when she steps back from a toxic corporate role, society just says, oh, it's such a pity she lost her ambition.
It is gaslighting on an industrial scale. I mean, she didn't lose her ambition. The system just let her fall because it built zero scaffolding for this phase of a woman's life.
Right.
And RAIN is the blueprint for building that missing scaffolding yourself. But it demands a radical, immediate shift in how you view your labor. You have to stop thinking about income and you have to start thinking about wealth.
Okay, I want to make sure we do not gloss over that distinction. Because in normal, everyday conversation, people use income and wealth completely interchangeably. But the manual draws a very hard structural line between the two.
A very hard line. Income is trading your time for money. It requires your continuous physical or mental presence.
The moment you stop standing at the conveyor belt or sitting at the laptop, the money stops.
Exactly. Wealth, as defined in this manual, is entirely different. Wealth is time. It is agency, and it is legacy. Wealth is owning the assets that generate the money, allowing you to step away without starving.
The way I've always thought about this, tell me if this tracks with the manual's architecture, is it's the difference between operating a toll booth and owning the highway.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. Earning a great salary, even a high six-figure executive salary, is just being the highest paid person standing inside the toll booth.
Yeah.
If you get sick or your mother needs full-time dementia care and you have to leave the booth, you get nothing.
Nothing at all.
So RAIN is about paving your own highway. It's about building the infrastructure so that the tolls collect themselves whether you are physically standing there or not.
That is the exact mechanism, because your time and your presence are exactly what the convergence window has stolen from you. You simply cannot afford to trade time for money anymore because you have no spare time left.
You have to build the highway.
But to pour the concrete for that highway, the manual insists you need capital, which leads us to the first tangible structure you actually have to build in RAIN.
The war chest, or to use the manual's precise term, sovereignty capital.
Yeah, this is where the structural audit becomes incredibly real. The manual requires you to calculate a strict burn rate.
And not what you wish you spent.
You know? No aspirational math here. What it actually costs to keep your life operational for a single month. Rent, mortgage, food, utilities, irregular medical costs, everything. And then it tells you to multiply that exact number by 6.
That is your war chest target.
Yes.
Okay, I have to push back here. Because I'm looking at this workbook and I'm putting myself in the shoes of a 50-year-old listener in, say, London or New York. If she has a mortgage and a kid in university, her monthly burn rate could easily be 5 to 8,000 pounds. So multiplying that by 6 means saving 30 to 50,000 pounds in pure liquid cash. If this woman is exhausted, dealing with perimenopause and feeling pushed out of her industry, telling her she just needs to, go save 50 grand sounds borderline insulting.
I know.
It feels structurally impossible for most people. How does Verity Johnston defend that massive leap?
She defends it by fundamentally changing the definition of what that money actually is. This isn't a rainy day fund. It's not a savings account you dip into when the car breaks down. This is leverage.
Leverage.
The manual is totally brutal about this reality. Until this specific war chest is fully funded, you are leasing your freedom.
Wow. Leasing your freedom. That is a heavy, heavy phrase.
Because it is a heavy reality. Think about the physics of desperation. If you do not have 6 months of runway sitting in an account, what happens when your toxic boss demands you cancel your weekend to finish a project?
You say yes.
You say yes. What happens when a freelance client offers you half your market rate?
You take it because half is better than zero.
Exactly. The entire corporate system relies on your lack of a war chest to keep your labor cheap and compliant.
So the war chest isn't about buying things. It's about buying the word no.
Yes. Sovereignty capital is the exact amount of money required to look at a toxic corporate structure, an exploitative contract, or even a draining marriage, and simply walk away without blinking.
A woman without a war chest takes the first offer.
A woman with sovereignty capital sets the terms. The manual says that sovereign wealth is not a feeling of empowerment. Empowerment is fleeting. Sovereign wealth is a figure.
A hard number.
If you don't define the real number, you cannot build the walls of your fortress. Vague targets just produce vague architecture.
And there's a very pragmatic, almost covert directive attached to this in the manual that I found fascinating. It explicitly warns the reader to never disclose the existence of this fund to anyone who might feel threatened by her autonomy.
Yeah, and that goes right back to Johnston's time as a union rep. She understands power dynamics. Sovereignty capital fundamentally shifts the balance of power in any relationship. If you are in a situation, whether it's a professional partnership or a personal relationship, that relies on you being financially dependent, revealing that you suddenly possess the leverage to walk away can trigger a highly volatile, hostile reaction.
Your grandmother might have called it running away money.
Exactly. It is security that exists solely for you.
So we have the target, we know the math, but we still have to answer my earlier objection. Where does a tapped-out midlife woman actually find the capital to fund this war chest?
Right, because you can only cut your burn rate so far before you hit bone.
We can't just budget cut our way to sovereignty. We have to create the capital.
Which brings us to what I think is honestly the most conceptually brilliant part of the entire manual, monetizing the invisible.
This is the massive pivot from saving to building, and it requires recognizing a huge economic blind spot.
Which is?
Midlife women have been producing highly sophisticated intellectual property for decades. But because it happened outside the formal corporate structure, they never got institutional credit for it. The manual calls this shadow IP. Let's really break down exactly what that means because I think it's a total paradigm shift for the listener.
Shadow IP is the high-level expertise the formal economy refused to name or price. So let's look at a really granular example from the real world.
Okay.
Imagine a woman whose mother develops early onset dementia. For 5 years, this woman has to navigate a labyrinthine healthcare system.
Right. Dealing with doctors, insurance, local councils.
Exactly. So she builds complex spreadsheets to track medication half-lives. She develops legal frameworks for power of attorney across different jurisdictions. She creates a behavioral de-escalation protocol for when her mother gets agitated at night.
And society looks at that staggering amount of work and just calls it, being a devoted daughter.
Or they just call it coping.
Yes, coping.
But structurally, commercially, that is not just coping. That is a proprietary crisis management protocol. It is a highly scalable methodology.
Wow, yeah, when you put it like that.
If a massive consulting firm built that exact system, they would license it to elder care facilities for tens of thousands of pounds. But because a woman built it in her kitchen at 2 a.m., it's just considered invisible labor.
So the manual is telling the listener to take an inventory of all these invisible systems. The return-to-work protocols she built after maternity leave, the neurodivergent advocacy frameworks she developed for her kids' school.
Yes, and package them as actual, licensable intellectual property.
Because unlike a salary, which relies on your physical presence, a framework can be licensed.
Exactly. A methodology can become an automated digital course. A protocol can become a book or a corporate training module. That is how you build the highway.
That IP generates capital while you are asleep or while you are at the hospital caring for someone.
And this feeds directly into how we structure our income going forward. Because if the convergence window teaches us anything, it's that relying on one boss or one company is a massive, unacceptable vulnerability.
Right. The term Johnston uses is single employer risk.
Yes. If a single boss or a single freelance client accounts for more than 60% of your total income, you do not have a career. You have a concentration problem.
Which is terrifying when you think about it.
When the convergence window hits, and you inevitably have to drop a ball somewhere, that single point of failure will destroy your entire financial foundation.
To fix that, the manual introduces the 4-layer income model. Can we walk through the mechanics of how these layers interact? Because it's not just about, having 4 random jobs. They serve entirely different structural purposes.
Right. They are load-bearing pillars. Layer 1 is the stability layer.
Okay, the baseline.
This is your floor. It could be a predictable part-time employed role or a solid long-term retainer with a reliable client. It's the money that keeps the lights on and pays the mortgage. It is low risk, but also low leverage.
You trade time, but it's safe. Then you move to layer 2, the premium layer.
Right. So this is active consulting or advisory work, but crucially, it is sold at your actual market value, not the suppressed salary rate an employer historically dictated to you.
So this is where you charge for the real depth of your expertise. But you are still technically trading time for money.
You are. Which brings us to layer 3, the scale layer. This is the one that solves the time problem.
Where the shadow IP lives.
Exactly. This is the intellectual property, the licensed frameworks, the digital tools, the books, that is completely decoupled from your hours. You build it once and it scales infinitely.
And finally, layer 4.
Layer 4 is the network layer. This is compounding income generated through referrals, community platforms, and strategic partnerships.
Okay, I have to stop you again here. I am looking at these 4 layers, and if I'm the listener who is already drowning in the convergence window, managing perimenopause, managing my parents, fighting ageism, hearing that I now have to build 4 simultaneous complex layers of income, makes me want to close the workbook and literally go to sleep.
Right. It sounds overwhelming.
It sounds like a recipe for total burnout.
And if you tried to build them all at once, you absolutely would burn out. But the manual anticipates this exact friction. Year 1 of RAIN is not about achieving full 4-layer diversification.
Okay, so what is it about?
It is about understanding the end state architecture, but only taking the first deliberate, hyper-specific step. The enemy here is vagueness.
What do you mean by that? How does a midlife woman fail by being vague?
If she says, I'm going to quit my job and do some consulting, she will fail.
Because some consulting means anything.
Some consulting is vague. It has no boundaries. She will end up taking any client at any price and recreate the exact exhaustion she just escaped. Specificity is the only shield against burnout.
So she has to define it.
The manual demands you define your micro niche. You don't say, I'm a consultant. You say, I operate as a fractional COO for independent pediatric dental clinics, charging £2,500 a month per clinic for a maximum of 4 clinics.
Wow, that is incredibly specific. And just for those who might not be familiar with the jargon, a fractional COO, Chief Operating Officer, is essentially renting out your executive-level operational brain on a part-time basis.
Exactly.
You give a small business the high-level strategy they desperately need but can't afford full-time, and you get a lucrative retainer without a 60-hour work week.
That's it. You take the constraints you identified in the RISE section, maybe you can only work 20 hours a week because of caregiving, and you design one specific stream of income that respects those constraints.
So you nail the stability layer first.
Right.
Then maybe in year 2, you package a piece of shadow IP for the scale layer. It is a sequenced build.
Yeah. So as you start building these assets, your fractional CO business, your licensed protocols, you inevitably run into a new structural problem, which is distribution and visibility. Where does all this IP actually live?
Yeah.
Because if you build your entire brand on LinkedIn, you are handing the keys to your newly built fortress right back to the system. This is section 4 of the methodology, the digital estate. The absolute non-negotiable rule here is that you do not build your dynasty on rented land.
Meaning Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, they are the landlords.
They are landlords, and the algorithm is the eviction notice.
That's a great way to put it.
If you rely solely on social media, You are entirely at the mercy of black box algorithms that can suppress your content, shadow ban your account, or change their entire distribution model overnight without any right of appeal.
And we have to be honest about the structural physics of these algorithms, right? They are inherently mathematically ageist.
Let's really dig into that because I don't think people realize how systemic the digital erasure of older women actually is. It's not just a feeling that you're getting fewer likes. It is hard-coded.
It is hard-coded. Look at the recruiting software scanning CVs.
Yes. Many applicant tracking systems are literally programmed to penalize or filter out graduation dates prior to 1995.
That is insane.
And look at social media visual algorithms. They are trained on engagement data that overwhelmingly favors youth. The system literally scans the geometry of your face, determines your demographic, and throttles your reach because the historical data says midlife women aren't highly monetizable for ad revenue.
The convergence window is literally being encoded into the next layer of our global digital infrastructure.
It's terrifying. It means you aren't just fighting human bias in an interview room anymore. You are fighting the math of the internet itself.
So what is the architectural defense against that?
You build a castle and you build a treasury. The castle is your own website. It doesn't need to be a massive, expensive web platform, but you must own the domain. You control the real estate.
And the treasury?
The treasury is your email list.
Because an email list is a direct, algorithmic free line to your audience. No one can stand between you and an inbox. Social media followers are vanity metrics, but email subscribers are sanity metrics.
Precisely. But the manual is not telling you to retreat to your castle and pull up the drawbridge. You still have to operate in the modern digital economy. And this brings us to one of the most unexpected and frankly brilliant elements of RAIN, its approach to artificial intelligence.
I was so surprised by this when I read it. The narrative right now is that AI is this terrifying tidal wave coming to replace knowledge workers. But the manual treats large language models, things like Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, as essential force multipliers for the midlife woman.
But there is a very strict sequence to how you are supposed to use them. You are the charioteer. The LLM is merely the engine.
Explain the sequence, because getting it wrong seems dangerous.
The sequence is everything. If you sit down at ChatGPT with a blank page and say, hey, write me a business plan for elder care consulting, the machine will spit out generic, beige, hallucinated nonsense.
Right, the typical robot speak.
Why? Because you asked a machine trained on historical average data to write your specific future.
Right.
The manual demands that you do the slow, agonizing human work first. You take a pen and paper. You name your reality. You write out your shadow IP, your specific constraints, your exact target market.
And then you bring it to the machine.
Yes. Then you use the AI companion prompts provided in the workbook to pressure test your thinking. You say to the AI, here is my framework. Act as a skeptical venture capitalist and find the 3 biggest holes in my logic.
Oh, that's smart.
Or take this highly technical protocol I wrote for neurodivergent advocacy and translate it into a pitch for a school administrator. You are using the AI to extend and accelerate the thinking you have already secured.
But the manual takes this a step further, and this is where it gets incredibly profound. It introduces this concept of machine teaching. This isn't just about making your workday more efficient. This is about structural correction.
We have to look at how these LLMs are built right. They are trained on the vast corpus of human historical data. And as we've established, human historical data reflects decisions made in the context of extreme structural inequality.
Right. Historical data erases the labor, the intelligence, and the very existence of midlife women. The machine literally does not know what you do because society never bothered to write it down.
Exactly. So when the listener is prompting the AI using the highly specific vocabulary she learned in this manual terms like the convergence window or wisdom poverty,
Which is a brilliant term, by the way.
coined by the strategist Abby Ellis.
Yes, wisdom poverty, or the tax of silence. When she uses those words, she isn't just getting business advice.
He is actively teaching the machine. She is forcing the neural network to process, weight, and contextualize vocabulary that describes the actual lived complexity of a midlife woman's professional reality.
Every time you feed your detailed shadow IP into an LLM, you are injecting your data into systems that were built to exclude you.
There is a quote in the text from the strategist Abi Awamosu that is it's vital. She says, AI needs its mothers.
AI needs its mothers. That actually gave me chills when I read it.
It is an incredibly powerful framing. You aren't just a passive user of AI. You are training it. You are raising it. Every prompt you write, using this matriarchal framework is a collective correction to the historical record.
You are forcing the machine to recognize your existence.
Yes.
Which is the perfect transition from individual sovereignty to collective power. Because the manual is absolutely adamant about one thing. Building your fortress in isolation is fragile. A single war chest can be depleted. A single website can go down. If you want true resilience, you need collective architecture.
The myth of the self-made woman is a patriarchal trap.
Yes.
It's designed to keep you isolated, competitive, and ultimately exhausted. The manual states clearly, a matriarch travels with a council. You do not build alone.
And it provides a literal blueprint for this council called the Alliance Protocol. It says you need two specific groups of people in your orbit. First, the expanders.
Right. These are the mentors or peers who are 10 steps ahead of you.
And the interesting thing is you don't even necessarily need them to mentor you directly. You just need their existence. You need them to serve as proof of concept that the massive thing you were trying to build is actually structurally possible.
Because seeing someone else occupy the space proves the space exists.
Exactly. But the council isn't just about looking up. You also need the draft.
These are the mentees, the women coming up behind you. You have an absolute duty to send the elevator back down. And practically speaking, teaching your frameworks to the draft solidifies your own mastery of your IP.
And binding this council together is the amplification protocol. This isn't a suggestion in the manual, it's a mandate.
A strict mandate.
When you finally get a seat in the room of opportunity, when you're at the table where the budgets are signed or the keynote speakers are chosen, and a woman in your council is not in that room, you speak her name.
You quote her expertise. You cite her data. You do not climb over each other to be the token woman. You wedge the door open and pull each other through.
It is a total systemic rejection of the scarcity mindset. And Verity Johnston and the Matriarchs and the machine team actually back this up structurally within their own business model.
They do, with the 2-to-1 bursary pledge.
Explain that, because it's so rare to see this in practice.
For every 2 paid members in their community, a free place is automatically unlocked for a woman who cannot yet fund her own access.
And the manual makes a point to clarify that this is not charity.
No, charity implies a power imbalance. This is ethical architecture. It is deeply grounded in donut economics.
Let's explain donut economics quickly for anyone who hasn't read Kate Raworth's work, because it's vital context here.
So donut economics is an economic framework that argues humanity must operate within 2 boundaries: an ecological ceiling, meaning we don't overshoot the planet's resources, and a social foundation, ensuring that no human falls into the hole of the donut, lacking basic needs like food, education, and equity.
So the 2-to-1 bursary is an application of that social foundation.
Exactly. It proves that the goal of RAIN isn't just personal wealth accumulation. It is a circular economy of wealth. Right. You don't build the ladder to pull it up behind you. You build a lift.
But sometimes building the lift isn't enough. Sometimes you have to actively fight the gravity of the system trying to pull you down. And that is where the manual gets incredibly tactical with something called the swarm and the coded out campaign.
The swarm. This is the collective countermeasure to that algorithmic suppression we discussed earlier.
Right.
If you know mathematically that the LinkedIn or Instagram algorithm is actively throttling the visibility of older women, you don't just sit there and accept it, you engineer a hack.
Walk us through the mechanics of this digital judo. How does the swarm actually defeat a multi-billion-dollar algorithm?
It works by exploiting the algorithm's own engagement velocity metrics.
Okay.
Algorithms prioritize content that receives immediate, high-quality engagement. So the coalition coordinates. When one member of the swarm posts a piece of evidence-backed content, the rest of the coalition drops everything.
They swarm it.
Within 30 minutes, they flood that post with 15 to 20 substantive, long-form, evidence-backed comments.
Not just a great post.
Yeah.
Or a little fire emoji.
Yeah, real contextual paragraphs. Because the machine's natural visual bias might want to suppress the post based on the creator's demographic, but the text processing side of the algorithm suddenly sees a massive, immediate clustering of high-value conversational text.
The engagement velocity overrides the demographic penalty.
The algorithm is forced to conclude, oh, this is highly relevant content, and pushes it out to the broader network. You are using the weight and momentum of a bias system to throw it off balance. Isolated nodes are weak, but a unified swarm dictates the physics of the platform.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second and look at the fortress we've built here.
Yeah.
You have calculated and funded your war chest, you have packaged your shadow IP, you've established the 4 layers of income.
Your digital estate is secure off rented land.
Right. You are teaching the AI, and you have your council swarming the algorithms. You are finally ready for the exit.
The manual calls this graduating from the base camp for rebellion. But an exit strategy isn't just about, rage quitting your corporate job on a Tuesday. It requires an identity bridge.
I love this concept. Because if you've been Sarah the marketing director for 20 years, the psychological shock of suddenly being Sarah the solopreneur can literally paralyze you.
You need a bridge. You start being the consultant on Saturday mornings before you stop being the employee on Monday mornings. You let your nervous system adjust to the new identity while your war chest provides the financial airbag.
And as you make that transition, you issue what the manual calls the burn notice.
Crucial distinction here, though. You do not burn bridges with people. You burn bridges with patterns of subservience.
Yes, you systematically execute the habits of the good girl.
The apologizing for taking up space, the volunteering for uncompensated administrative tasks.
The shrinking of your expertise to make others comfortable in the room, you burn those patterns to the ground. And in their place, you erect the legacy statement.
Now, when people hear legacy statement, they immediately think of a corporate mission statement.
Right, some bland, committee-approved paragraph about leveraging synergies to optimize deliverables. It makes your eyes glaze over.
A corporate mission statement describes what a machine does to generate profit. A legacy statement is a deeply intimate intellectual anchor. It is the codified record of what a woman built, why she built it, and precisely who she built it for.
It is the true north of her new sovereign architecture. But it's also a line in the sand, isn't it?
It is absolutely a declaration of refusal. The legacy statement explicitly articulates what you absolutely will not accept anymore.
Because the system had a plan for you.
The system had a very clear plan for you during the convergence window. Silence, a glass ceiling, a suppressed salary, and endless invisible labor. The legacy statement is your formal, written refusal of that plan. It is a declaration you must write true, not modest.
Which brings us to the final part of our deep dive today. The manual closes with a bonus chapter called The Men Who Stayed. And I want to speak directly to the listener here looking at our workbook. Do not think for a second that because this is labeled a bonus chapter, it is an afterthought or an appendix.
No, it is the absolute thematic climax of the entire manual. It is the essential lens through which you must view every single piece of architecture you have just spent the last 3 sections building.
The chapter opens with a story that seems, at first, entirely disconnected from everything we've talked about. It's about Mark Cucurella.
Right, the football player.
He's a world-class left back, playing elite football on the global stage. And if you've seen him play, you know he has this very distinct, massive head of long, curly hair. But the manual points out that he doesn't keep it long for branding or for sponsorships or because it looks good on a poster.
He keeps it long because his son has autism. And when his hair is down, his son can easily recognize him amidst the chaos of a stadium or a busy room.
It is a profound story of physical adjustment. Here's a man operating at the absolute apex of a hypermasculine, hyper-competitive industry. And he's intentionally adjusting his physical presence and his professional image to meet his child exactly where his child is.
And how does society react to this?
Society stops and applauds. The story goes viral on social media. Pundits talk about it. It is universally called beautiful. It's called brave.
But Johnston uses this story to point out a devastating structural hypocrisy. When care is performed visibly at altitude by a man, he is elevated to hero status.
But what happens when a woman in the convergence window, a woman in the sandwich generation, does the exact same thing?
Right. What happens when she adjusts her career trajectory, drops down to 4 days a week, or steps out of the executive track to meet the needs of a child with autism or a parent with dementia?
She certainly doesn't get called brave by a hiring committee.
She calls it a gap on her CV. She hides it in interviews. She prays the algorithm doesn't filter her out because of it.
The act of care is identical. The emotional and physical labor is exactly the same. The audience is the only difference. But the economic consequence of that audience shift is devastatingly disproportionate.
Let's bring back that hard data we opened the show with, because this is where it lands. In the UK, unpaid care is valued at £184.3 billion annually.
In the US, it's 53 million people providing informal care, and women are providing 61% of it.
This is the core argument of the entire chapter. Care does not diminish in value because it is invisible. It diminishes in visibility because it is performed by women.
It is a massive structural economic infrastructure that the global economy completely requires to function, but has intentionally kept off the book so it doesn't have to pay for it.
And the system enforces this invisibility in incredibly subtle, insidious ways. Johnson shares these deeply personal, yet universally recognizable anecdotes in the text to illustrate how men are culturally trained to avoid this labor.
Like the story about her brother.
Yes. She talks about her brother, who, as a teenager, intentionally washed the dishes terribly, breaking things, sighing theatrically, just so his mother would stop asking him to do it.
But years later, when he got his own apartment, it was immaculate. He was always entirely capable.
It's the performance of incapability.
Weaponized incompetence.
Exactly. She also talks about her father, who delivered the statement, "I can't cook," with the absolute gravity of a terminal medical diagnosis.
Right, like it was a biological fact.
It was just an accepted fact of the household.
Yeah.
Until her mother went back to work as a night nurse. Suddenly, the audience changed, the safety net was gone, and he had no choice. And she writes that he suddenly produced the best chips she had ever eaten.
And the manual brings in the work of the brilliant cultural critic bell hooks to contextualize this. We have to understand the toll this takes on everyone. Patriarchy doesn't just economically oppress women. It requires men to psychologically mutilate their own emotional selves to qualify for its rewards.
The system demands dominance. It insists that sentiment, care, and adjustment are forms of weakness.
But the men who refuse that script, the Mark Cucurellas, or Verity's tall, basketball-playing colleague mentioned in the book, whose entire life is proudly, unapologetically organized around maximizing time on the sofa with his wife.
They prove something utterly vital to the premise of Reign. They prove that the dominant patriarchal script was always a choice.
It was a choice.
It was never a biological reality. It was never an issue of capability. The brother could always wash the dishes. The father could always cook. The corporate system could always accommodate care.
And this brings us to the ultimate synthesis of why this chapter is here. This isn't a chapter designed to give men a round of applause and a cookie for doing what women have been doing in the dark for centuries.
Not at all. The thesis is structural. When empathetic men perform care visibly, publicly, and without apology in the professional sphere, it fundamentally changes what is legible as care in our society.
It takes that 184 billion pound shadow economy, drags it out of the darkness, and forces it onto the visible national ledger.
The world that you, the listener, are building through the architecture of Reign is not some separatist world without men. It is a world where care is finally recognized as a public act.
It is a world where care is shared, where it is valued, and where it is accounted for on the corporate balance sheet as the massive, essential economic infrastructure it truly is.
Let's synthesize the journey you have been on with this manual. In Recover, you audited the exhaustion and took back your breath. In Rise, you identified your constraints and stepped into the version of yourself the system never accounted for.
And now, in Reign, you have built the sovereign wealth they explicitly told you was not yours to claim. You have built the highway.
And you have funded the war chest.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you close this workbook and look at the IP inventory you've just created. If a generation of midlife women actually do this, if they successfully codify this shadow economy, fund their war chests, and pull their genius out of the traditional structures to build their own fortresses, what happens to the corporate systems that relied on them being invisible?
They won't just have to adapt. They are going to face an absolute systemic talent famine.
The boys who see their fathers making visible choices to prioritize care, and the daughters who watch you build your dynasty despite every structural barrier thrown in your path, they're going to inherit a fundamentally different world.
The system never had a framework for women, so through Recover, Rise, and Reign, you have built one yourself, and when you are done, the architecture you have designed will be the world those children grow up in.
That is not hope. That is the plan.